We're going to have our panel discussion on Beyond Differences, Fostering DEIB at the Workplace. Let me proceed to introduce our panelists. Firstly, we have William Baxter, the project lead of inclusive business practices at the European Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka, of which works with Sri Lankan businesses to identify opportunities for and implement inclusive business practices that both contribute to social cohesion while also enhancing their business performance. William advocates for business to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion into their core strategies with a particular focus on integrating the dimensions of ethnicity and religion into these strategies, and collaborates with the other chambers to promote DEI practices through their annual corporate awards. Ladies and gentlemen, can we have a round of applause for William Baxter, please? Our next panelist, yes please, our next panelist is Ishan Jalil, who is a DEI consultant and founder, president of Ability for Action. Ishan Jalil is a DEI consultant of disability rights advocates, recognized the first-born blind person in the world to participate in competitive rowing. With over 15 years of experience in disability advocacy and DEI initiatives, Ishan has made a notable contribution on the global platform, including a guest presentation at a high-level United Nations meeting on disability and development, focusing on post-2015 development agendas. Ladies and gentlemen, Ishan Jalil. Our third panelist is Shahara De Silva, leads talent and development at Hemas Group, a Sri Lankan conglomerate, of course, and brings a wealth of experience across the public and private sectors in both Australia and Sri Lanka. Aspiring to bridge the generational divide in thinking, Shahara is also committed to enabling impactful multi-generational collaboration to create significant business value. As a lead trainer on unconscious bias for the Diversity Collective, she works closely with corporates to drive impactful DEI initiatives, making her a sought-after expert in the field. Ladies and gentlemen, Shahara De Silva. And our panel will be moderated by Bani Chandrasena, who is a People Link and President of Diversity Collective Sri Lanka. Bani's professional career has been in human resources across many industries, ranging from banking to manufacturing to the knowledge industry, spanning over 20 years. With her education qualification being a bachelor's in business administration and computing science from Western New England College in Massachusetts, USA. Bani received her executive education from the Southeast Asian Leadership Academy in 2016. The last 5 years have been in diversity, equity, and inclusion, with 3 years focusing and leading diversity, inclusion, and well-being at LSEG Sri Lanka. Ladies and gentlemen, your moderator, Bani Chandrasena. A round of applause, everybody. And on that note, I will hand over to Bani to carry out the discussion.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. Thank you, panelists. Thank you for the audience for choosing this track. Let me try and get this started. So what I thought we will do is I'm going to try and set some context first and then actually move into the panelists to help with solving some of the issues, situations we have in corporates. So let me get started. I want to cover 3 points. One is, what is this definition of DEIB in a general layman sort of sense? 2, we're talking about future of work. What is different? What is the characteristics of this future, the future that we're referring to? And the third point I'd like to kind of leave you all with before we get to the panel is, what are the expectations I think employees would have in the future? So let me just get started. So as a definition, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in the workplace is about creating a workplace where everyone feels valued, respected, and can do their very best towards contribution. Now, how will that look? Will it look different from now to the future with the way the world is going? So if I were to characterize the world related to work. I'm going to pick a few areas. I mean, there's a lot more, and I'm going to let the panel kind of come back to me if they disagree or want to add. But a couple of points that come to mind for me is technology. Technology is here, and it is disrupting every day, and it's getting more and more different. So that sort of means how we actually connect with people, whether it be our everyday actions to how we connect with our customers, suppliers, all of that, our behaviors are sort of influenced by technology. Technology, and without technology, the other piece that I think we have to be mindful of is that the world is getting smaller and smaller. I know technology is one reason it's getting smaller, but not necessarily the only one. For example, people are moving around, traveling around a lot more. There's a lot more migration. So there's a lot more interconnection of people in terms of backgrounds, cultures, and people who are very different in the same room or the same space working on common goals, etc. And the third point would be the planet. We can do all of this stuff, but if we don't protect our planet, there'll be nothing for us to live in. So I think a lot of actions that we do every day now are going to be looked through the lens of how it's impacting the planet. Before I go into the third point, I'm just going to pause for a second and maybe turn to the panelists to say whether you all agree with my point of view. This is just my point of view. There could be a lot more. Any thoughts around what I just shared? May I start with Ishan?
Yeah, a very good afternoon to all of you, and thank you, Bani, for posing that very interesting question. So, of course, I certainly agree, because at the end of the day, what matters, like, okay, we talk about DEIB, but then what matters is how it's implemented and how it's felt. So, if we are not concerned, or if we are not aware about our surroundings and what we mean to achieve by fulfilling DEIB requirements, then we have to rethink as to we have to rethink our entire strategy, if I may put it that way. So yes, I agree with you.
Thanks, Ishan. Would any of you like to add anything more to that? I know this was off the cuff, I kind of brought this up, but I figured we do need to talk about the objective of why we are talking about DEIB and the world we are kind of getting ready for. So that's kind of the context I want to put in.
The only thing I would add is I think you've defined DEIB very well, and I think it's really important that when we talk about DEIB, that definition is broad, because sometimes as companies or individuals, we have our own particular focus area. For instance, our work, we focus a lot on ethnicity and religion, but in each different company, there might be a different focus, and there's so many different aspects of DEIB, whether that's gender, LGBT, ethnicity and religion, like I mentioned, language, ability, age. It's extremely broad, and so it's important to always see that there's opportunities in a lot of different areas.
Fair enough. So I think one of the other speakers did mention there's a lot of things that make us similar, but also realizing those differences, and the differences might be different in the context of your consumer as well as the group that you're working with. Thank you, Will.
Yeah, Bani, I just want to add something there too, and I think, we're talking about the future of work today, and I think this is more like a call for action, because using the term, I think, future alone undermines the urgency. The future of work, where all of us are engaging in our workplaces, is actually happening now, from multi-generational to the need to actually embed DEI practices in what we're doing. So I think this is more like a call for action as well, because the future is not so far ahead. We're living it today. Yeah.
Agreed. So I think the theme here is future in the context of whatever we're doing, we need to continue to do and accelerate on the areas where there is going to be radical change happening, and that's kind of what I want to focus on over the next 30 minutes. One other point I'd like to leave you all with before we get into the panel. So the panel here today, the agenda would be very much leaving you all with some sort of, well, different strategies, solutions if inclusion, the culture of inclusion is something that you all realize is important or decide is important. And the panel here will be sharing some of their strategies and what has worked, what they have had, what they've learned from, and challenges, etc. So one other objective I want to start with before we dive into that is what is the expectation of the employee or the future employee? A couple of points that I want to share with you before we get started would be that the future employee would be looking for opportunities of growth. They would be looking for a respectful workplace where they are treated fairly and it's free from harassment and discrimination. Meaningful work, I think, is another area that lots of the speakers spoke about. Having purpose in the company, but even the employees now more and more would be looking for purpose behind what they're doing, so more meaningful work. And all of these factors is what will bring in the B in DEIB, where you have a sense of belonging. So setting that stage, let's move into why we're actually here. Okay, so what I'd like to ask Shehara, Ishan, and Will is, in the context of creating this kind of culture of inclusion, a workplace where everybody feels like they belong, what would be one strategy that you can talk of that has helped start that journey or has actually made that happen? Let me start with Will.
Sure. Thanks for the question. I think the strategy that, so for some context, the European Chamber of Commerce is working to promote social cohesion and national unity reconciliation through companies. So we're looking at DEIB through that ethnic and religious and linguistic background. And I think the strategy that we realize is successful, especially with businesses, is that when we talk about DEIB, we often tend to talk about problems and history and negative things, which is really important to acknowledge. But we also need to tell positive stories, because to inspire businesses, we need to be positive. You need to tell specific stories of the impact of activities. And today I was just looking at this box. It's a great place to work. You know, it's positive. If we were talking about places to work that aren't bad, that wouldn't inspire people to take action. So I think the strategy that we have been trying to do with businesses is to acknowledge the issues that are faced with discrimination and barriers to promotion, but to also tell the positive story of how businesses can move forward. So one example of that is we recently working with Haley's Advantage to try and spread some of their success stories. And one way that they've been teaching their employees about DEI concepts is through the use of street drama. So the company worked with a young theatre group. They designed a performance which looked at a group of circus animals discussing their workplace. It was very fun, humorous, but at the same time it could teach employees about important principles of DEIB and values like respect, understanding, and tolerance in the workplace. So through telling those stories, which are very specific and not just jargon, and I mean, it's important to have the terms and the data, but I think we need specific stories, because then a business can hear that and say, I can replicate that at my business too, and that will be successful. So yeah, I guess telling positive stories is the strategy we've been focusing on.
And the other point there is, through those kinds of actions, you're also making it very relevant to the audience, instead of it being very generic or necessarily global.
Exactly, because even when we are specific, the audience seeing that then reflects that on their own environment. So they might not copy the business activity exactly, but you might see a street drama and say, within our organization we can use art. It's not the exact same theatre, but maybe we'll do something with a visual art competition in our organization. So yeah, people reflect their environment and how they respond to those positive stories.
So if you use that as a principle, it's the communication strategy and the communication.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Ishan, if I can come to you about what would be a key strategy with regards to bringing in this culture of inclusion that you have come across that you would put as a high priority.
Yes, so in my experience and with the partners and stakeholders that I have worked with, one major strategy, like when it comes to employers and employees, is to connect them in, like, not just to, like, make sure that they get to know each other, but okay, in, like, we are talking about a Sri Lankan context, right? So in Sri Lanka, many employers actually hesitate to employ persons with disabilities, about which I'll be kind of deliberating a bit later in my deliberations, I mean in my speech. So, but then what we do is like, there are certain existing mechanisms, government and non-government, which connects employers who are interested in employing persons with disabilities. So we kind of help with those, connecting those stakeholders. And also, like, one strategy which we are kind of right now compiling, or like something that we are coming up with right now, is to create a central database to connect employers and persons with disabilities who are seeking employment. So that's one major aspect of what we do. And also another thing that we are doing right now is we are talking to the Ministry of Social Services, I mean Social Service and Social Welfare, as well as the Department of Manpower. So we are talking to those people, and there's something called a linkage creation program, which connects employers and employees, like especially employees with disabilities. So another, like, a key part of that strategy is not just to sensitize the employers, but also to train employees as to how to adapt to their new working environments. So that's, those are a few key highlights of our strategy.
Thank you, Ishan. And I think that's really important because since it is a new experience for both parties, helping both parties meet and making it more viable for success, I think will be a huge positive. So thank you for that. Shahara?
Thanks, Bani. Okay, so I think just to make the best use of my time today as well, I want to move on to the strategy really quickly. And so I'm going to make the assumption that, of course, the organization and the leaders are aligned. It's really important that for any of these strategies to sort of materialize and for us to be able to reap the harvest of such strategies, that the organization and the leaders align. And we sort of start with understanding what are we trying to solve for, and how are we trying to solve these problems, right? So on that assumption, and assuming all of these have come together, I think one of the most impactful ways in which you can drive a DEI strategy and foster DEI in your workplace is by starting from a place of introspection. And what I mean by that is you start from within and you start reflecting on your own behavior. And I want to sort of paint this picture of a workflow of sorts, right? So you start from a place of self-awareness, and then you move on to a place of where you understand the need for action. Because or not, we just jump right in, right? We jump into the deep end. But if we start from a place of self-awareness and then we move on to understanding the need for action, your actions are going to be more impactful. And then, of course, subsequently, it leads to institutionalization and embedding really good practices in your organization. And this is going to be a cycle, right? Because this space is always evolving. Human behavior is evolving, right? And it'll go hand in hand with a lot of engagements that you do in your respective organizations. But I want to tell you why I think introspection is so important. And it's because there's so much that we aren't even aware of in this space. We don't know what we're unaware of, right? And so to really, really unravel the sense of belonging, you have to start asking yourself, when I'm at my workplace and when I'm creating a certain culture in my workplace, what's disrupting my sense of belonging? right? We all have our socio-cultural backgrounds, experiences that have impacted our own belief systems, right? And we bring these to our workplace. And of course, because of this, we have certain feelings, and they can be distorted and whatnot, and opinions about certain matters. And that's all good and well because it's within us. But what starts happening is that some of these things start impacting our behavior, and that, of course, in turn impacts others. And so when you take a step back, you start wondering how much of it could be irrational. And it's because we're coming from a place of, our personal preferences coming into the picture. And so when you really look at that and human behavior, and you look at key decision makers in your organization, right, you tend to think about the impact that their decisions have on certain interactions at the workplace, and how much of an influence that they have over certain interactions at the workplace. And therefore, I always, with all the organizations I work with, and especially at HEMAS as well, and a lot of the work we do, I always push for us to start, whether it's DEI or anything else that you're trying to introduce into your organization and embed as a practice, I always try and push to start from a place of self-awareness, where you move to then, understanding the need for action. You start actioning it and implementing it, and then eventually it gets embedded in your practices, and this becomes natural. And I heard a TED talk by an author which really resonated with me. So all these strategies aside, he said, true transformation comes from not knowing what's ahead. Being human in such times is more important than being in the know. And I think that's what I want to sort of reiterate in telling you about a key strategy, which is, if all else is a little gray and unclear, then just hold on to, your humanity, because there's a lot that's changing in this space, and it'll impact our organizations. Yeah.
Thanks, Shehara. So if I were to, at the risk of sounding like I'm doing DEI speak, I think what you described to me would be the fact that we all have unconscious biases, and being able to tackle it and being aware of it, and how do we get people to become more aware of our biases. Now, we all have biases, which is normal, which is if you've lived, if you have a brain, you would have a bias. But in this journey of inclusion, it is being able to identify those biases and think before you act on those biases. And so when it comes to training, when it comes to awareness sessions, those would be some of the languages companies would be looking for or realizing, because self-awareness, I agree with you, but sometimes getting to self-awareness is a tough one. Egos, our fast-paced lives kind of get in the way.
Absolutely, and I think I'll allude to some of that in the challenges we discuss as well.
Sure, okay. Since we do have a limited time, I'm going to dive into asking you all to share with me, while trying to embed these strategies, execute these strategies, what are some of the pitfalls, some of the challenges you all have faced, and what kind of tips could you give the audience in terms of when they're going on their journeys, what to look out for and what to try and be ready for to improve. Let's start from this side.
Okay, so I want to talk about two challenges specifically, and just because you're starting from where I left off about introspection and reflecting on our own behavior, it's almost like a paradox, right? And what I mean here is that when we look back on our own experiences, today where you are makes a lot of sense, because you realize, okay, I'm a sum of all these diverse experiences that I've had in my life. But from that sort of a standpoint, when you look forward, yes, you see yourself as someone maybe a little older and grayer, but you don't necessarily see yourself as someone who holds a different point of view or a different belief system or a different perspective. And an example here is, let's think about the elections coming up, right? You probably have a very strong view of who you're going to vote for today. And you cannot imagine a future in the next 2 or 3 weeks where you vote for somebody else, right? So it's almost entrenched. So in organizations, when we're fostering a culture of DEI, encouraging people to break away from, you know, their own belief systems and sort of yearn to understand clearly, as clearly as possible, the reality of certain interactions has been very tough, and it's often where organizations find themselves in between a rock and a hard place. And the second challenge is being true to the outcome that was intended in the first place when you went about some of these strategies, right? And what I mean is that when you're driven by targets and quotas, especially in the DEI space, it's quite easy. Your North Star, it's quantitative, right? So you know what you're working towards. And it's measurable. But what's beyond some of those targets, right? How do you actually measure a sense of belonging when it comes to an employee? Right? It's a tough place. And so some of this materializes only in the long term, and it's very tough to measure when it's qualitative, right? So that's also another challenge we face. But I didn't want to sort of leave this high and dry, and what I wanted to encourage you to do in such situations and to overcome such challenges is to look at always getting pulse checks, you know, from your employees, to do regular pulse checks, and understand where they're coming from, what are their thought processes, and make it regular. The second thing is to look at embedding good practices at every touch point of the employee's life cycle. I mean, from recruiting them to, you know, their development needs to even at the point at which they're going to leave your organization. Make sure that you embed good practices, you continue to monitor, and thereby you continue to improve their experience within the organization. It's one way of sort of tackling it. I mean, just at HEMA's alone, we're looking at 4,500 plus individual differences, right? So it's not an easy task that's ahead, but if we are continuously monitoring and we are continuously engaging, then we have more to go with when it comes to qualitative data. So yeah, those are the two challenges I want to.
Thanks, Shay. If I were to maybe try to sum up, because it is, especially in your case, because it is a large company, it is lots of activities, lots of little activities, quick wins, but also realizing it's a long game, not to try to rush it, because then you're not going to get the actual intentional change. You will just get some peripheral, superficial kind of change, which doesn't quite link to what you said before in terms of humanity and actually making change. Thank you. Over to you, Ishan. Just wanted to point out something before I let you speak, Ishan. In terms of the visually impairment, I'm not sure whether you can see that we have a full house. It's a full room of people who are eagerly listening to all these solutions. Over to you, Ishan, in terms of what are some of the pain points, difficulties that you have observed, experienced in this journey.
Right. Thank you, Bani, for just explaining what's happening around. And actually about the pain points or the challenges, there are a few significant challenges that we have come across. One major challenge is not just about employers, but about society as a whole, like social stereotypes. When we talk, like when we say blind person, okay, what is the picture you have in your mind about a blind person? It's mostly, okay, this person can sing, right? So, okay, blind people can sing, deaf people can draw, right? Wheelchair users can do something. So, what, like, or maybe Down syndrome people can dance. So, there are certain stereotypes which needs to be kind of addressed. Specifically now, say, like, I know there are some blind people who are excellent computer programmers, right? And some deaf people who are like, you know, working for like huge companies, like, you know, multinational companies, right? So just like that, one challenge is like social stereotypes. Because if we do not address those social stereotypes, whatever the DEI trainings we do, whatever the programs that we kind of do to foster DEIB principles, does not really mean anything, right? Another challenge that we kind of always come across is how to convince employers to employ persons with disabilities. like once I remember, like when we organized the job fair, this was about 10 years ago, one of our volunteers called a specific company, right? And they were like, hi, we want to do a job fair, and like, can we collaborate with you? And like, so basically our volunteer told this other person who was, who answered the phone, someone who's in the managerial level, by the way, someone who, the person who answered the phone, like our volunteer was like, we want to organize a job fair for persons with disabilities. And the answer was, we don't want to make our company disabled. So, you know, that's the brutal reality on the ground in Sri Lanka. But now, thanks to all these DEIB awareness sessions and programs, things are changing, but not as fast as we would like like to see. So convincing is another, like as I said, that's one of the biggest problems, because in Sri Lanka, okay, I have been employed like after I became after I passed out from Columbia University. I was working for 3 companies, like 3 NGOs, and they made very cost-effective accommodations. Like, I mean, they made very cost-effective, reasonable accommodations for me, so that like I felt that I belonged in those places, in those workspaces. So, like, employing a person with a disability is not an extra burden, because now, like, I will, like, if anyone requests, I will certainly share. There's an Accenture report which says that if you employ persons with disabilities, your company, like, the profit margin, like the profit margin goes up by 30%. The net, the profit margin goes, the profit margin goes up by 28%, net income grows by 30%. So there are some very interesting findings like that, which I can share certainly if you want to. So it's very important to take those points into consideration when we think about employing persons with disabilities. Another challenge, I would say, is tokenistic inclusion. Like, I have seen several instances where, like, I speak based on my experience, several instances where employers only employ persons with disabilities just to, you know, apply for an award or to kind of, you know, get some CSR award, right? Like, whatever. Whereas actually the person has not been empowered. Like, if you talk to the person, if you like observe the person, no improvement at all. They are just a number. So they have been employed, the person has been employed only to tick a box. So those are a few challenges that I have come across in terms of employment of persons with disabilities.
Thank you, Ishan. So I think it starts with the point you said, where if people don't look at just the disability and look at the wider person, the more holistic person, then the challenge you talked about will actually go away as well, because you actually then see what this person is capable of, not just being you know, distracted by just the one disability. And then that, I think, is what shows in numbers, in statistics as well, because one, you are actually getting a whole heap of advantages and abilities from the person who you hire if you are a little bit more customized. And the other point I think you bring up is, everybody was talking about this equity versus equality. So equity is needed in order to give equal opportunity and to give people the opportunity to be their best. But I think what I'm also hearing you say is equity doesn't necessarily have to be very expensive. We all assume it's very expensive, and hence we'd like to stay away from it. But if you actually think about it, if we use our common sense a little bit, it does not necessarily have to be all about cost. Fair? Okay, thank you, Ishan. Over to you, Will.
So to jump off what Ishan was just saying about corporate hesitancy to engage with DEIB, I think the biggest challenge that we've seen in our work so far is corporate hesitancy and in some cases pushback to DEI. And to jump off what Chahara was saying, I think the strategy to address that is to take the long-term approach because we know that we're doing the right thing, we're finding the correct ways to do it, and by continuing that pressure over a long period of time, we will see progress. And I think when we look at the States at the moment, there's some pushback against DEI in the US and other countries, and that can be quite disheartening to see when we're in this space. But it's really important to remember that these things are like a pendulum, and it swings very slowly. We have a few years where there's a lot of progress that is made, and then there's a few years where there's pushback, and that comes from a range of different factors outside of our control. But what we need to do is continue applying pressure, showing the positive impact, showing why this is important, and have faith that over the long run that is persuasive and that will see progress.
Thank you. And I think there's a lot of data in different researchers done about this is just not a nice thing to do. It's actually good for business as well. So always maybe when you have to go influence somebody who is harder to influence, going there with the data might be a good way to actually get some approvals on some of these actions that we're referring to. I do realize we are standing here between you and your lunch, so we're going to take about another 10 minutes. Maybe very concisely, if each of you maybe can share one message you'd like to leave the audience with in this space, where if they're going on the journey of inclusion or trying to get onto taking the first steps, what could that be? And if you do have a personal story, I'd love for you to share that, because I think authenticity and stories, I think, like you said, are the way people will remember what we're talking about. So if I can maybe take 2 minutes each, and each of you share a story or a message that will then leave the message and they can go for lunch. Who'd like to go first?
You're looking at me, so I'm just going to go. Okay, so I just want to sort of bring your attention to the fact that DEI goes beyond gender differences, minority groups, racism, etc., right? And something that's very topical at the moment and close to my heart is the whole conversation around generational gaps. And I prefer personally to refer to this as a generational chasm. And what this means is that there are generational differences, right? And it is what reality is. Several of us spoke about this before also, that so many generations coexist within an organizational system today. And it's so important that we capitalize on this and we leverage the opportunities that this environment is now creating, as opposed to putting so much time and energy into bridging this perceived gap, right? Perceived generational gap. And I think my personal story is a testament to this, because so many times I found myself to be the youngest person in the room. And I've had very positive experiences because of a handful of forward-thinking leaders and mentors who saw beyond my age and my inexperience and saw the potential I had to actually create value, right? And so I just want to leave you with this thought on the generational chasm, and acknowledging the differences and using it, to leverage opportunities, as opposed to really putting a lot of time and energy into unpacking how we're going to bridge the generational gap. That's it, Danny.
Will, I'd like you to go next.
Sure. So I think the message I would like to leave you with today is that we see DEI can be great for businesses, it can be great for people within the company, but the message I'd really like to put to you is that it can also have a positive impact on our entire society and the entire country. And for me, the personal story that resonates with me as I'm Australian, and there was a long series of Qantas, the Australian airline, ads called the Spirit of Australia, I Still Call Australia Home, and those ads included First Nations people and culture and language. And for Australia's story of reconciliation with its First Nations people, that ad, you know, it gives me goosebumps to watch because it is so aligned with my own culture and country. And the impact of what the company Qantas has done then creates reconciliation across the entire country. It makes people proud to be Australian in a very inclusive way that includes people of all different races and ethnicities. And so the impact of what the company did in that case wasn't just about its employees, it wasn't just about the business success, although those things were enhanced, it was about the entire country. And we've actually seen that in our work in Sri Lanka too, with some companies promoting an inclusive national identity through their marketing campaigns. There was recently, SoftLogic Life actually released a campaign saying, "Do you know we live in a blessed land?" And it's a short video including Kovil's Buddhist temples, churches, mosques, essentially in the same way as that Qantas ad, making all Sri Lankans feel proud to be living in this blessed land, and doing so in a way that promotes an inclusive national identity. So, yeah, the message I'd like to leave with you there is that the impact of DEIB can be so much more than just the company and its employees. It can even impact entire countries.
Thank you, Will. Over to you, Ishan.
Yeah, so I'll be very brief. So one story actually is up until 2016, the Sri Lankan Election Commission, now that we are always talking about presidential election and all of that, up until 2016, Election Commission did not have a policy or did not have a procedure as to how to facilitate the voting rights of persons with disabilities. But in 2016, I joined an organization called the International Foundation for Electoral Systems, that is IFES, a US-based INGO working on electoral best practices. And so after me joining that organization as a disability inclusion specialist, and as a result of my constant engagement with the Election Commission, they realized that they need to have a disability focal point at the Election Commission so that they can facilitate the voting rights of persons with disabilities. And now that, you know, like since 2019, the Sri Lankan Election Commission has a person focused, has a person who's a focal point on disability, and he himself is a person with a disability. He's a wheelchair user, someone who's a very brave advocate for disability rights. So this is someone called Mr. Tikiri Jayawardena. So he's the focal point for persons with disabilities, and this all came about as a result of me and other people advocating for the rights of persons with disabilities. At the end of the day, like when you say success stories, right, actually what matters is how those success stories impacts people on the ground, right? And people who are not heard of, not seen, right? So like those who are invisible. So that is what actually happened. Like, you know, of course, Sri Lanka being a developing country, and, you know, we are not the best of countries when it comes to disability inclusion. We have a very long way to go, but very progressive steps are being made by the Election Commission. So I would say that's a success story of employing, employment of persons with disabilities. And my message, you know, while agreeing with all these esteemed panelists and you, Bani, with your excellent inputs, my message simply would be to give us an opportunity. Trust in us, and if you give us an opportunity, we can prove to you that disability is not inability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishan. I think the order was perfect. I think I'm going to pause now in case there are any questions from the audience. I don't know. Are there mics out there, or how does it work? Any questions? I think everyone's hungry. Okay. Will, Ishan, Shehara, thank you so much. And I think I'll leave you all with one message, which is that the inclusion journey, whether it be company, community, globally, it's the journey. There is no destination, so it is a continuous improvement, continuous learning journey. So I hope we are all on it in some shape or form, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.